Are you sitting comfortably? That's where every good story begins. And everything has a history. Or bench. My stick. My hat. But today, we're going to tell a different story. A story of two little engines. Not those ones with the funny faces from the island of Sodor, wherever it is. This is the story of a real pair of engines. From somewhere real that we all know and love. Their names are Aldwyth and Nellie. Both four-wheeled locomotives made at the Manning Wardle and Company Works, here in the city of Leeds. Nothing remarkable about that, you might say. But what made Nellie extra special was where this little engine would eventually end up. And Aldwyth, they have a special story too. Let's begin with Aldwyth. She was the older of our two engines. She arrived in 1882 and she had always wanted a younger brother or sister. So when the people in the factory told her another train was being made similar to her, oh, how excited she was. She seemed to wait forever and ever. Then one day, in 1915, during the First World War, Nellie was finally built. Oh, the two engines both looked alike. They both had chocolate colouring and saddle tanks. Nellie and I did everything together. They would run down the tracks, racing each other and singing their own special song. Puff and climb, puff and climb, puff and climb, go the trains on the line. Puff and climb, puff and climb, puff and climb, go the trains on the line. They spent many a day together. And as much as we love spending time with our friends and our family, we also love a good adventure. And Nellie was about to have the adventure of her life. It began one afternoon when the foreman came to Nellie to tell her of a far, far away place, a beautiful country, somewhere in the west of Africa, a place called Sierra Leone. Now the foreman told Nellie to get ready for a wonderful journey. It didn't seem such a wonderful journey to Nellie as she was lifted off her rails and high, high into the sky, swung by a big crane and heaved onto a big ship. Nellie had never been to the seaside, let alone on a ship. She'd never seen the actual sea, and it was more bumpy than she thought. Large waves lashed the sides of the ship. Nellie was cold and a little bit unhappy, a little bit seasick and a little bit homesick. Where was she going? Why was she being separated from her friends, her sister Aldwyth, left alone in the workshop? She wondered these things as the ship sailed across the seas, up and down, up and down, and sometimes up and to the side, and down and to the side. Just as Nellie was finally getting used to that funny motion, she hadn't felt seasick for days. She arrived at her destination, a place called Freetown, the capital of Sierra Leone. We all like travelling. And when Nellie arrived, she realised how hot and sunny it was in her new place. So different to the nice chilly Yorkshire mornings and the lovely cool rain that fell in Leeds. And the smells, so many new smells. They were different from back home too. The smell of the foods. She'd been used to her driving having fish and chips and meat potato and Yorkshire puddings. But in Sierra Leone, along the streets of all the towns and cities, there were new foods. Foods like fresh mangoes, oranges and pineapples, fresh plantains, ginger beer, fried potato, cassava fried with a pepper sauce. Small bags of popcorn or peanuts, roasted corn, or skewers of grilled meat or shrimp. Now, her drivers ate rice at virtually every meal, topped with a variety of sauces, including potato or cassava leaves, karen, okra soup, groundnut stews. At least Nellie's job was the same. She was still a shunting engine, and she helped to transport the goods that were loaded onto the ships at the ports. However, the things she moved had certainly changed. Now, she pulled big wagons, loaded with elephants and leopards and monkeys and diamonds and rice and mangoes. But Nellie loved the excitement, and she grew to love her job and all the new friends she made. But she never forgot her sister. She would sing their song as she went up and down the lines. Puff and climb, puff and climb, puff and climb, go the trains on the line. Puff and climb, puff and climb, puff and climb, go the trains on the line. Now, Aldwyth was having adventures all of her own. She went to do some very important work, and a little bit secret. She worked with the Royal Air Force at the RAF Kenley base in the south of that there London. Like Nellie, Aldwyth would shunt goods from one place to another place. Like Nellie, she would sing their special song while she was working. Puff and climb, puff and climb, puff and climb, go the trains on the line. Sometimes a song would be interrupted by the roar of aeroplanes as the great metal birds circled above her and landed and took off again. She would watch the planes come and go, and she would watch as they roared down the runway. She would watch as they disappeared into the clouds, and she would wonder. She would wonder if any of them were going to that far, far away place on the western side of Africa. Now, the aeroplanes became less and less. And in around 1959, when RAF Fighter Command left the aerodrome for the final time, Aldwyth left too. She didn't go far, far away, however. She moved, well, just a little bit up the road in that there London, to carry on her work for the Royal Air Force at the Ministry of Works depot at RAF Kidbrooke. There she puffed and climbed, shunting stores, up and down, making sure all the engineers had all the bits and pieces they needed for their maintenance. And all the cadets who were there to do training had what they needed too. But all too soon, her work was done there too. And when that base closed down, around 1967, Aldwyth spent a lot of time sitting around in a shed just like this one, wondering what her little sister Nellie was up to, and thinking about the times when they would steam together singing their song. Puff and climb, puff and climb, puff and climb, go the trains on the line. Puff and climb, puff and climb, puff and climb, go the trains on the line. Well, with the song in her pipes and the thoughts of her sister in her mind, Aldwyth fell fast and soundly asleep. When she woke, she found herself in a whole new place. Her adventure had taken ever such a funny turn, and no one knows why or even how. she ended up in a brand new country, the flat common lands of that there London were now majestic mountains. The smell of aircraft fuel and fumes was replaced by the fresh salty smell. The roar of aircraft was replaced by strange horns and hooters. Well, rather a lot of close harmony singing too. Perhaps one day we might discover the mystery that took Aldwyth to Cardiff docks in Wales. Aldwyth didn't do a lot of work anymore. New trains could go quicker and they could start in the mornings without having their boiler stoked. The sea air was lovely, but the salt didn't really agree with her paintwork, and soon her beautiful paint in a shiny metal began to dull and rust. And by 1970, she was just a shadow of her former self. Once again, she had lots of time to think about her sister Nellie. Now Nellie had been working hard too for many, many years. She must have covered every inch of that 350 mile of narrow gauge railway in Sierra Leone, probably more than just once. Nellie helped to move minerals across the interior to the coast. And during World War II, Nellie too helped with the RAF, who were fighting in North Africa. She shipped fighter aircraft to the end of the line where they were assembled and flown across to Egypt. Perhaps, just perhaps, one of those airplanes was one of those her sister had watched disappear off into the clouds while singing their song. Nellie would share stories with all her friends on the line, many who were also from Leeds. Some came from the Hunslett engine company, and in the late 1950s they were joined by 8 engines, 8 big diesel locomotives from Hudswell Clark, which was also in Hunslett in Leeds. By 1961, well, they were joined by another 24 bigger trains from Hudswell. But alas, no one could share news of her sister Aldwyth. They did, however, share her song. Puff and climb, puff and climb, puff and climb, go the trains on the line. Puff and climb, puff and climb, puff and climb, go the trains on the line. Now, you would think that having so many big brand new engines that there'd be no more use for Nellie, but that wasn't the case. Oh no. You see, the batteries on the big diesel locos weren't big enough to fire them up in the morning. And so Nellie and her 3 steam engines from Hunslett continued to operate. But just like this story, everything must come to an end. And just like her sister, by 1970, Nellie's working life was well and truly over. And just like her sister, many, many miles away, she was seen stored outside. People came to see her now and again, but not to fire her up, not to put a bit of flame in her firebox. Oh no, they just took little bits and pieces off her. The only thing Nellie could be happy about now was a sign somebody had hung around her saying, "Not to be banned." Well, the whole railway in Sierra Leone closed down a few years later. But luckily for Nellie, she was collected and hidden away with a few other engines in a big warehouse. Just like her sister, she stood hidden. And even in 1986, when our friend Aldwyth here was collected and brought back to Leeds, Nellie stayed hidden. By the end of the 20th century, Aldwyth here had been cared for, a nice new coat of paint, all her brasswork polished and cleaned. Nellie stayed hidden. Aldwyth had been cared for so much she looked as good as new. like the day she rolled out of the engine works here in Leeds. But Nellie stayed hidden. But then, just as the 21st century was being born, Nellie was found. And just like her sister, she was cared for. Just like her sister, she was brought back to her former glory. And now, just like her sister, she sits with pride in a museum too. Now, sometimes Nellie sends a message all the way back from a home far, far away in Sierra Leone's National Railway Museum, all the way back to Aldwyth here, at her home in the Leeds Industrial Museum. And each year, around August, we ask everybody to celebrate Nellie's birthday. We ask them to sign a card to let Nellie know that her big sister Aldwyth hasn't forgotten about her, and neither have her friends here in the city of Leeds. And we all remember the story, and we all join in the song. Puff and climb, puff and climb, puff and climb goes the trains on the line.